When I was 12 years old, like many children, I believed in ghost stories, boogeymen, and a good number of urban legends. In reality, fear made me believe in all sorts of macabre things, but I had never really experienced anything truly paranormal. The noises behind my window were probably due to tree branches that, pushed by the wind, were scratching the glass. In the evening, the noises from the floor, when I was alone at home, were probably caused by the wear and tear of the building. And as my father often said at that time, it was simply a matter of the woodworking. The shadows that sometimes appeared on the ceiling or against the wall once night fell, while I was in my bed, were perhaps simply the result of my eyes trying to adjust to the dim light. Only today, I'm 34 years old, and it was then impossible for me to know what was causing the strange noises under my bed when I was a teenager. These sounded nothing like what I was used to hearing. Sometimes I felt like someone was sliding on the floor. I also happened to perceive swallowing sounds, and at times, when I was about to sleep, I heard a kind of whistling, as if someone with a serious lung disease was trying to catch their breath with difficulty. Then we moved one fine day. My parents were worried about staying in the area, as disturbing disappearances were rampant in the region. We then moved into our new home, with a lot of new furniture. Quite a few things have thus been changed, and my bed was part of it. Whether it was a simple coincidence or not, while I was hearing these strange noises almost every night, everything stopped after that. I never heard these strange sounds again since then. But if I'm telling you this today, it's for a very specific reason. Because this weekend, I had to go to my parents' house, which was about 200 kilometers from my home. I celebrated my little brother's birthday, and so I decided to sleep over to avoid too much driving. Upon arriving in the guest room, I was immediately shocked. I could have recognized it among thousands, having spent many nights sleeping and having nightmares on it. My old bed was right there before my eyes. Before going to sleep, I questioned my father, because I was absolutely certain that he had gotten rid of it during our last move. He then explained to me that he had stored it in a box not far from the house, just in case one of the existing beds ended up breaking, which apparently was the case. With a lot of apprehension, given the horrible experiences I had had in it, I finally lay down on it and tried to put things into perspective as much as possible. A child's imagination is particularly fertile, and it is easy for them to see horrors in the most mundane things of everyday life. So I closed my eyes and started to nostalgically rethink the pleasant moments I spent on it. I sometimes played the Game Boy late at night, secretly, like many children my age. At that time, it was not uncommon for me to read a comic book under the covers at equally late hours. Then, just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, I heard a noise. At the time, I didn't quite realize what had just happened. I looked at the window, but it clearly didn't come from there. The sound was much closer. Worse yet, I had felt slight vibrations. So they could only come from one place. This second noise made me jump with such force that, without realizing it, I jumped up. I was then next to my bed, frowning, and slowly realizing that these noises, I knew them perfectly well. They were the same sounds I heard when I was a child, the same noises that came from under my bed years earlier. I then headed towards the switch and turned on the lamp. Then, without waiting, I got down on my knees and looked under the bed. As my head neared the ground, a bloodied, skeletal hand seized my face. I woke up in a sweat, panicked. The nightmare I just had was terrifyingly realistic. When I sat up in bed, trying as best I could to gather my wits, I noticed a disturbing detail. I was absolutely certain of one thing, that before I went to bed, I had definitely turned off the light. Only at that moment, it was on. I didn't understand anything about what was happening. And just as I was about to turn it off again, thinking that I had simply had a small moment of confusion, I heard something terrifying. As you can imagine, it came from under the bed. Only that noise, I had never heard it before. It was the sound of a baby crying. My body then started shaking so hard that I had trouble standing up. I stared at the bed in terror. What was happening was paralyzing me with fear. And I was then certain that I was again in a terrible nightmare. I intended to leave this room as quickly as possible when the door opened. It startled me so much that I nearly lost my balance and stumbled. And at the same time, everything suddenly stopped. There were no more cries. But even more disturbing, the light, which was previously well lit, was again off. Yet, I was standing right there, next to the bed. My mother then broke the silence and asked me what was going on. I then told her about my nightmare in every detail. At the time, she seemed stunned by my speech. After a moment, she suggested I sleep on the couch, which I did without hesitation. I spent that night rethinking everything that had happened. I even wondered if I hadn't had some kind of sleepwalking episode. After all, it was the only logical explanation for all the events that had unfolded. And above all, it was the only way I had to reassure myself about these horrible events. I was able to sleep peacefully, despite the discomfort of the old couch. The next morning, after breakfast, my mother suggested I stay another night. Since we are now separated by great distance, and consequently see each other less frequently, I naturally accepted. I spent the day with my parents and little brother, unable to fully let go of the events from the previous day. The rest of the day went on quite normally. And quickly the night began to fall. Despite my terrible experience, I had an idea. I convinced myself that everything I had experienced, given the disturbing similarities with my childhood, could possibly have a supernatural explanation. Usually, people are constantly trying to prove that anything out of the ordinary must have a natural explanation. I realized that eliminating this possibility would not only help me sleep better in the coming nights. All of this resurfaced painful memories that would undoubtedly continue haunting me at home, but also to simultaneously confirm the sleepwalking thesis, if applicable. So, to do this, I installed an application to be able to film myself all night sleeping on this horrible bed, without the camera going into standby mode. The application activates when there is movement, and so this would have allowed me to see what happens when I sleep, but maybe also to record the noises coming from under the bed. At the time, it seemed like a good idea, but it was the worst decision I've ever made in my life. At the start of the night, nothing unusual was heard. Then, like when I was little, and like the previous night, it's when my eyes started to gently close that I heard something. This time, I felt like I heard someone eating under the bed. I tried to move, but it was impossible. I had already heard about sleep paralysis, but until then I had never experienced it. While the chewing sounds continued to echo in the room, I tried to move my arm to turn on the bedside lamp. With great difficulty, my arm began to move, slowly moving towards the bed's edge. And just as I was about to reach the switch, the same icy skeletal hand then grabbed my arm. I couldn't move an inch. It's as if the grip of that horrible hand on my arm paralyzed my entire body. I could hear my breathing, which gradually started to become ragged. At that instant, I berated myself for turning so foolishly. Sleeping on this bed, I had only one desire: to wake up and put as much distance as possible between this cursed bed and me. But as the horrible hand continued to grip my arm, a face began to slowly emerge near me. My heart began racing so fast I could feel it pounding in my temples. I could only see the eyes of this face, but the mere sight of them was enough to leave an indelible mark in my mind. It had no pupils, its eyes were completely black, and it was staring at mine, with such intensity that I felt like at any moment it could absorb my entire soul. The rest of the horrible creature's face was much larger than normal. I didn't even know how something so massive could hide under such a small bed. The tangled hair of the horrible monster with bluish skin fell halfway across its face. And there, after several wheezing and jerky breaths, the creature spoke in a dark and cavernous whisper. "Thank you for coming back. Now I'm less hungry." This one tasted much better than the others. Then, without warning, I woke up. Once again, I was completely drenched in sweat and on the verge of having the biggest panic attack of my life. I immediately got up, grabbed my phone, and settled down on the couch to watch everything it had recorded. I was expecting to see all sorts of things, but I never thought I would watch something as terrifying. The video was only 3 minutes long. All the others were uninteresting, because on most of them, I was awake. But in the video where I was supposed to be sleeping, there was neither the monster nor the noises I had heard. There was only me. I saw myself sleeping on my side, when, all of a sudden, I positioned myself on my back, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. A brief moment passed, and I got up. The video then only showed the empty room, without the slightest noise. Then, after a moment, I saw myself walking through the door, with a sleeping child in my arms. I couldn't clearly identify who it was. I even thought my eyes were deceiving me. The situation was so unlikely, my hands were so sweaty that I had trouble holding my phone. I was absolutely certain I had never done that all night. I was starting to think that I was truly sleepwalking, and that, given what I was watching, it could really become dangerous for me. And others. But as I was trying by all means to reassure myself, I saw myself crouching down and placing this child right at the foot of the bed. And then something horrible happened. The partially shredded hands of the horrible monster who had spoken to me earlier then grabbed his legs. He forcefully pulled him under the bed. I dropped my phone in terror. What I had just seen was improbable. It couldn't be true. So I picked it up, my hands still trembling, and I tried to watch the video again. But it no longer existed. It was as if it had never existed at all. I did everything I could to find it afterwards, but it was impossible for me to find even the slightest trace of it. Of course, I saw a psychiatrist the very next day, and he immediately put me on medication. I had managed to convince myself that everything I had experienced was just the product of my horrible imagination. But today, 2 days after these horrible events, I saw a missing person alert on the 20 o'clock news. When I saw the picture appear on the screen, I found myself paralyzed, just like when I was in that horrible bed. Because I immediately knew who it was. It was the child I had fed to the monster under my bed.